Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. The massacres of Kibbutz, Kfar Aza and Be'eri have shocked the global conscience. In Be'eri, a community which was situated just about 5 kilometers away from the Gaza border, people were massacred after a surprise attack by Hamas terrorists and infiltrators. The Israeli military claims that Hamas terrorists stormed the houses of the people in Be'eri and butchered over 100 people there. Similarly, in Kfar Aza, as many as 40 children, many babies, are the ones reportedly killed in one of the most brutal fashions along with their families, many of them burned alive. The attack allegedly involved the use of guns, grenades and knives against civilians in their homes. Kfar Aza, once a peaceful community, is now marked by soccer nets strewn on lawns, abandoned strollers and damaged sidewalks and houses after they were burnt and residents were compelled to flee. Even today, Hamas terrorists unleashed a volley of rockets towards Tel Aviv as a response to the Israeli airstrikes. The Israelis, on the other hand, have vowed to further escalate the situation. The preparations are in full swing. Tanks are being mobilized near the Gaza Strip. It has already been declared, most of it, as a militarized zone. A ground operation is coming up next. The International Committee of the Red Cross is in contact with Hamas and Israel to try and facilitate the release of hostages taken into Gaza. Meanwhile, we've also heard of some reports of efforts being made behind the scenes to also ensure that civilians can be taken out of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, UK's Defence Minister James Cleverly and US's Secretary of State Antony Blinken are in Tel Aviv and have assured their full support to Israel. But the most shocking aspect of what has transpired in Israel and around the world over the last 5 days or so is this. We live in a world, shockingly, where some are either drawing false equivalences or making excuses for Hamas's unimagined brutality and unspeakable barbarity. The butchers of babies are being defended by some today in open. Had there not been images that showed us exactly what Hamas did to civilians, women, elderly and babies, and many of these images uploaded by them themselves, there are enough apologists who would have washed these crimes off, just like they're unwilling to believe the barbarities that are yet not out by way of videos or images. Can there be any defense of these butchers, and what should be done with those who defend such crimes by contextualizing them? We'll take that question to our guest joining us in just a bit. But first, let's take a look at what exactly happened as far as Kfar Aza is concerned. This is one of those kibbutz which has come under the most brutal attack as far as the Hamas terror attack is concerned. So houses in this kibbutz were ransacked and then set ablaze. The IDF, which is the Israeli force, has claimed that children were butchered in an ISIS way of action. The IDF has also added that Hamas terrorists left an ISIS flag at the massacre site. It's interesting that this has come out because in one of the protests that took place in Sydney, Australia, for a pro-Palestine cause, also had flags of terror groups like the ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But speaking about Kfar Aza and the massacre there, over 100 people, including 40 kids, have reportedly been slaughtered by the Hamas. The Israeli military had earlier claimed that kids were beheaded, which had really shocked the world. As of now, though, we are still waiting for an official confirmation from the Israeli government. But this is also something interesting that happened earlier today. US President Joe Biden spoke about this issue and he said, and I quote, "I never thought I would see such things." He talked about the massacres that took place in Israel and he went on to say, "Have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children." He went on to add, downplaying Hamas's atrocities and blaming Jews is unthinkable. Of course, this was the right message to come from the US president, a message that will go a long way in making sure that Jews are not further isolated and marginalized. But here's the catch. Soon after Joe Biden made that statement, White House came out to clarify that Biden has not actually seen the pictures or confirmed reports independently of young babies being beheaded. His comments, the White House says, are based on Israel's claims and the Israeli media reports. And they also went on to say that Israeli spokesman had said that babies were found with their heads decapitated. Now, there are many news interviews that have been reported on this by what soldiers on ground have told reporters, and many of them had reported this story from Kfar Aza. Some of those statements by Israeli soldiers and commanders of their units that went to these kibbutz are on camera, but of course there is still some confirmation that the world wants to see. I don't know what that confirmation is going to be, where it's going to come, who's going to independently verify any of this, but we'll wait and see. Take a look though at the devastation that has been caused because of this unprovoked, unprecedented attack by Hamas terrorists on Israel, which of course has now expanded this entire clash. So over 1,200 Israelis are now dead. This is the highest toll for Jews since the end of World War II, especially in any given single day, which was 900 when the attack happened first on Saturday. More than 3,000 Israelis are also injured. 130 Israeli soldiers have reportedly been killed, and about 1,600 Hamas terrorists have been killed by Israel. In fact, the IDF had earlier come out to say that 1,500 bodies of Hamas terrorists have been found inside Israel alone. And there are reports that about 1,000 to 2,000 of such perpetrators actually managed to go back to Gaza before they could be caught or retaliated to. Speaking of what is transpiring in Gaza now, over 1,000 people are now reportedly killed in Gaza after Israel launched those counter-strikes. More than 5,000 people are injured. Nearly 260,000 Gazans are also reported to be displaced. Remember, of course, Israel has mounted massive airstrikes. They've pummeled a lot of buildings which are supposed to be of Hamas operatives. Many of them are guised as civilian buildings, but there is, of course, intelligence to suggest that there is a Hamas presence there. They also have their offices or their other bunkers below certain civilian facilities like schools and hospitals. And in this case, Israel is not holding back. They have pummeled Gaza like never before. But the big question is this. A lot of what transpired in Israel on Saturday and Sunday was actually caught on camera. It was uploaded by Hamas terrorists themselves to terrorize the world and to terrorize Jews. And possibly they succeeded. But who are these people who are still defending this unspeakable barbarity, these butchers of babies? We'll take that question to our guests in just a bit.
When our girls are not next to us, they were in the shelter for 16 hours without electricity, with bad connection to the phone. So we, managed to speak with them once in a while, and all the time you hear like tons of shooting over there. Nothing you can describe, and all along you just get messages, like WhatsApp and messages of people that are asking to be safe, to be released from the shelters because the terrorists are outside. And it was very bad moments.
Yeah, she's screaming.
This is the time the terrorists the clinic was attacked for hours, but this is the time, the second that the terrorists came inside and started butchering people. They shot me. They shot her between the legs. She's telling us that, and she's telling me they are on top of me, and they murdered everyone else. She's saying that.
He kept telling that during that whole time the terrorist was laughing.
They were laughing.
They were and making jokes between them, and just enjoy from those horrors they are making.
And basically we stayed in the safe room for about 12 hours, locked in the safe room, that we are not allowed to go out of the safe room because they are terrorists, because it's a matter of life and death. And we kept communicating, whispering for 12 hours, so nobody will hear us.
Let's go across to our guest joining us. Professor Eugene Kontrovich is Head of International Law Department, Kohelet Policy Forum, joining us from Jerusalem. Dr. Azrael Bermon is Senior Researcher, Institute of International Relations, Prague, joining us from Jerusalem. Professor Madhav Nalapat is Geopolitical Analyst in India. And Irina Sukerman, Geopolitical Analyst, is also joining us from Washington. Irina, why don't I start with you? I do thank all of our guests for making their time. Just the sheer brutality of what we have witnessed in Israel as part of these Hamas attacks. Do you think that it has really turned the tide as far as support for Israel is concerned in this fight at this very crucial hour, and has also evaporated some of the support for the Palestine movement, given that the Palestinian government till today hasn't really distanced itself from Hamas?
Thank you so much for inviting me and for bringing up this very important topic. I think it's too early to celebrate the turning of the tide. A number of countries have actually blamed Israel for this horrific tragedy, and not just other countries. We have also seen that coming from the top level academia in the United States, like the president of Princeton University, that produces the elites who then take place in governments and corporations all over the country and who influence public opinion. There is a heated debate on the left about the support for Israel. It's positive that there are many voices speaking out in support, that they are distancing themselves from those voices who are riling up, inciting anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli sentiments. But the fact that this is even an issue of debate is deeply concerning. And the mass pro-Hamas demonstrations all over the United States and Europe are likewise horrifying, because it means there are pockets of support for Hamas affiliated networks and sympathizers in the middle of Western societies. So while so far the Western countries have condemned Hamas, there's also been a pressure to de-escalate, even as Israel continued to fight Hamas still on its own territories. There were already calls to de-escalate, and there are calls to de-escalate even now when the military...
Yes, it's very shocking. Actually, Irina, I'm very glad you brought that up. There are some words we've heard, and they all sound very nice in international relations. I can even give it to some people that it comes from the right place. But, you know, words like de-escalation or a proportionate response. Some bodies have come out and said Israel's response should be proportionate. Now, I don't understand. How do you decide proportionality here? What is the proportionality to kids being butchered and, as some reports suggest, unconfirmed, beheaded in front of their families?
Proportionality in wartime refers to taking measures that are appropriate, the minimum needed to achieve a military goal. Essentially, it's an idea that you don't need to overdo it, just do as much as needed to be done, avoid excessive brutality, excessive force. Nothing that Israel has done can be under the definition considered excessive. They have issued multiple warnings to civilians in Gaza to evacuate. They have called on civilians to be removed, to avoid civilian casualties, and for as long as they could engage in surgical strikes to target particular terrorists, which became increasingly difficult over time. I think it's absurd to push Israel to stop military actions, because Hamas is using its entire population as human shields, as it has. That is what allows Hamas to get away with these horrific crimes, and no one, neither the United States nor any other country, would have held back if they were in the same situation, which is, I think it's ridiculous to hold Israel to a different standard.
Professor Eugene, are you disappointed that, as Irina was mentioning, the academia, the people who claim to fight the most for liberal causes, for human rights, they are the ones that have come out and almost in some cases unilaterally supported Hamas over Israel?
Two kinds of very disturbing responses. In academia, lots of professors, lots of universities are saying Israel is to blame for these horrible atrocities committed against itself. That this is just what else would you expect people to do? And even more disturbingly now, the head of the Secretary General of the United Nations, the President of the European Union, have already said that Israel should not be allowed to fight Hamas in a way to allow them to win. Israel has declared a closure of the Gaza Strip. They're not letting anybody or anything in or out. And they said, no, you have to give them electricity, you have to give them food. There's no army in the history of warfare that's been required to feed their enemy. Now, Israel is not trying to punish the civilians of Gaza, the innocents. They're trying to defeat Hamas. And an army fighting another force is allowed to deprive them of food, even if it does have consequences for the for the civilians. But we see in this international response, the reaction of the international community is, we feel so bad about the civilians being massacred, the babies being killed, the women being raped, but you have to let it happen again. You can't win. You have to leave this thorn in your side and this sword hanging perpetually over the head of your people. After the Holocaust, the international community has said never again.
Yes.
And now the UN, the EU is saying it's a shame, but you have to allow it to happen always again. You cannot effectively get rid of Hamas.
Interesting point you made. Dr. Azrael, I want to come to you as well. You're also joining us from Jerusalem. You know, there is this debate happening on social media right now, but also by way of a lot of reportage that is coming in from Israel, where first there were reports by reporters on ground, plus I have seen some soldiers on ground also say this on camera, that when it comes to massacres in Be'eri or Kafr Aza, for example, there were small babies, not only a large number of babies who were killed brutally, but some were beheaded as well. But there is also an insistence from most organizations and agencies, even governments right now, to see some sort of a proof for this. Do you believe that the Israeli government has ascertained what exactly happened, and will they be able to, I don't know how, but convince the rest of the world that is still a little bit skeptical about this, whether this actually happened or not, that yes, this did happen?
Israel has already invited the press into certain parts of the south to see for themselves. So as the awful, gruesome evidence comes to light, I'm sure Israel will it's terribly disturbing. You have to remember, it's also terribly disturbing, upsetting for the families.
Yes.
Who suffered, and I think I personally find this gruesome and this obsession with whether babies were beheaded or not. I find it very upsetting, and the fact is Hamas went out, killed women, children, babies. This is a fact. The fact that you don't need the babies to be beheaded in order to condemn this in the strongest possible terms.
Absolutely.
But Israel is already showing the evidence. Those people who don't want to believe it, some of those, not all of those, but some of those people are people who don't want to believe it because they may be sympathetic towards Hamas.
You know, interesting point you're making. This whole, whether kids were beheaded or not, or how many of them were beheaded, it's almost being used by some to say, okay, let's not jump to conclusions or let's not judge Hamas just yet because we don't have proof if babies were beheaded. All the other proof that has come out by way of videos and images, this is almost being used as a way to whitewash that. That, you know, it will be barbaric only if kids were beheaded. Do you sense that some people are trying to do that?
Yes, but I just find this whole line of thinking is just bizarre almost, and I think the fact is that Hamas carried out atrocities and something which, something that even Israel could not have imagined. We have to remember something which is an inconvenient fact here, but Israel under Netanyahu actually helped to strengthen Hamas. Allowed Qatari money to come in to Hamas. The argument was that Hamas has no interest in attacking Israel. And we've seen how badly wrong this is. The intelligence got it badly wrong, but Netanyahu himself is culpable. And suddenly the shock that Hamas are behaving like Islamic State. So this is, you know, I mean, it's so this, first of all, the awful trauma, the shock, and the suffering of Israeli families, the victims of these awful atrocities. And there's a lot of anger, by the way, with the government over the way.
Yes, I've seen a poll.
Has been so utterly. No one has. Very few ministers have visited the hospitals. And when a minister visited yesterday, she was screamed at. She was basically chased out of the hospital. There is anger here with this government. Real anger.
Absolutely.
Anger with Hamas. Anger with understandable anger with Hamas. But in the days ahead, once this war is over, there will be a huge reckoning with the Netanyahu government.
Absolutely. But, you know, it is still commendable to see there are hundreds and thousands of Israeli men of fighting age who are coming back to their country. They are, you know, getting involved as far as the operations are concerned. So all of those, the reckoning that you talked about, which should happen, of course, there should be a post-mortem. All of that has been left till a point, of course, before, till Israel can sufficiently safeguard itself and defend itself. Coming to Professor Madhav Nalapat as well. You know, Professor, I shudder to think what would have happened, what would have been the reaction of these terror apologists all around the world. As we find out, not just in India, but all around the world, it's the same design, the same playbook, the same words that get used to defend terrorists and cold-blooded murderers. I shudder to think what would have happened if Hamas terrorists would not have uploaded the images of what they were doing themselves. I almost feel the entire tragedy would have been washed completely.
Shivani, you know, what they're basically implying, the apologists for Hamas, is that the IDF decapitated babies, whether dead or alive, which is such an absurd proposition that I'm surprised that anyone could even entertain that thought for a second. It's absurd. The babies were found decapitated, and you're basically implying that the decapitation was not done by Hamas, which is a completely, but then we're used to this, Shivani. It was no surprise to me that there were probably more processions in favor of Hamas in the streets of cities of Canada than they were in the Gaza Strip. It was no surprise. And whether it's Australia, the UK, the US, all these different countries, you have mass processions, basically, in effect, in language which is not explicit, but which is implicit, supporting Hamas.
Yes.
And we have seen it happen in our case. A terrorist was gunned down in a gang war. And what did Prime Minister Justin Trudeau do? He blamed India for it. I mean, now you are seeing Israel being asked to give a proportional response. What does it mean by proportional response? This is an existential battle. Hamas has made it very, very clear. It wants to see the liquidation of not only the state of Israel,
but all
If
Jews.
You look at the charter of Hamas, they want the liquidation of the Jewish community.
Yes.
Now, for some time, I agree with Professor Berman that Hamas was basically some very unwise politicians backed Hamas. Qatar has backed Hamas. Turkey, a NATO member, has been backing Hamas pretty openly. It's still in NATO. Justin Trudeau justifies terrorists. And Canada, under Trudeau, is still in NATO. So we are a bit confused here. But Shivani, this is not news to us. All I'm saying is, in an existential war, it's either the Israelis or Hamas that is going to win the battle. And I have only two things to say. One, I pray that this conflict is confined to the Hamas and the Israelis, and it does not spread into places like Syria, Iran, other parts of the Middle East. And the point is that will play into the hands of Hamas. Hamas does not represent Muslims. Hamas does not represent the Islamic community. It's a fringe terror group, and they're attempting to cloak themselves in the garb of basically a very vibrant faith. So it's very important to understand that this conflict has to be localized But in this conflict, Israel has no choice but to go all out to eliminate Hamas, because Hamas has made no secret from the very beginning of its plans to eliminate the entire Jewish community. And we all know in the 20th century which was the organization that attempted a similar fate. And unfortunately, a huge number of Jews, people who have created works of art, of literature, of science, of culture, they perished. And now you're seeing an organization repeating that very same ideology, and being supported in Canada,
Professor,
Australia, UK, the US.
it is still easier to wrap your head around the fact that there will be radicals and fundamentalists, and these bodies or groups will raise their ugly head from time to time. But as I am wondering today, and I've been going through a lot of responses, not just by way of what the media is reporting in Israel, in other parts, but also by way of social media. And Irina, what is tougher to wrap your head around is that despite the images and the videos available, there were people who were willing to condone these actions. Imagine what would have happened if there were no videos. And in India, this is hitting very close to our hearts, because in the absence of video, a lot of people have given free pass, or have convoluted facts, or have hidden stories, buried stories like this. And if there were no videos of this, I think the world, some of the people, the way they have behaved, they would have denied this.
Unfortunately, even with the videos.
Irina first, then I'll come across to Eugene as well. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Unfortunately, even with the videos, there's still denial, there's still equivocations, there's still some sort of effort to equate.
Yes.
Yes, what Hamas did was indeed terrible, but Israel is also causing human civilian casualties in Gaza. So this sort of equivocation means that the evidence here is not the issue. It's not the issue whether Hamas did this or not. Beheadings, no beheadings. Everyone knows that Hamas is a terrorist organization. But they excuse the terror. They find justification for the terror, or they try to equivocate between Hamas, a dictatorship that is holding its own population by force, and Israel defending not only its own citizens, but all the international citizens and of all backgrounds and religions who've been targeted by Hamas. Let's just make it clear that Hamas is not only targeting Israel, it has boasted about getting support from Iran for potential attacks in other countries. It has international presence around the globe, just like other Iranian proxies and Islamist organizations. It's part of the Islamist network around the globe, and has international violent support that pursues attacks not only on Jews, not only on Israelis, but anyone who supports them in various countries.
Yes.
So Hamas is an international threat.
It is an international threat, and we've seen far too many terrorist groups like these that basically profess the same thing. Who their primary target is actually not relevant, but fundamentally it's the ideology that they profess, and all non-Muslims are at risk with that. Professor Eugene, do you think the larger Islamist network supporting organizations like Hamas will ever be brought to book, will ever be held accountable?
I mean, there's a name for the larger network supporting Hamas, and it's called the Islamic Republic of Iran, which organized these attacks, trained the people, provided them with material, picked the timing, and is also supporting the Assad regime in Syria and the Hezbollah militia that rules in Lebanon. This is an Iranian operation from the beginning. They have wrecked the Middle East. They're responsible for the destruction of Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and of course, it's not an Arab country, but they're ready to fight Israel to the last Arab, it seems, and they don't care, about who gets hurt. And it has a terror network that is around the world, and they are aiming at a nuclear weapon, which will threaten the entire region, from Israel to India. Nowhere will be safe if they manage to achieve that.
Yes. Dr. Israel, I'll just take a final comment from you. Just how are Israelis holding up? What is it that is keeping all of you together and committed to fight for your country? How are the Israeli people really holding up as we speak?
Well, can I just, before that, I'll answer that question, I just quickly want to respond to Eugene. Iran's, first of all, Israel's IDF has said that it's not clear that Iran was actually behind this attack. Also, other experts, such as Raz Sib at Tel Aviv University, has said that Iran clearly, obviously, was happy about this attack, but it's very far from clear that it was
directly involved.
Yes. This attack is not unclear. We will find out more about this in the coming days. But Israelis have responded. There is right now great solidarity. Israel is fully behind its soldiers. The readiness to fight. You have Israelis coming back from abroad on planes en masse so that they can enlist for the military. You have people on the streets handing out flags. There is, on the one hand, of course, the outrage about the attacks, a lot of anger, a lot of distress. On the other hand, a lot of determination, steadfastness, determination to restore Israel's honor, to deal Hamas a blow, and to head on to confront Hamas and defeat Hamas. There's no question. There is solidarity here in Israel, unity. Of course, once this war is over, it's going to be a different story. But right now, there is solidarity and unity.
All right.
And a determination to win.
I leave it on that note. I do thank all of our guests for joining us. It's been, of course, a very distressing week, not just for Israelis, but really everyone around the world, just to witness the horror that has transpired in Israel and in many of its cities.